This is the Real Coaching Podcast. I'm Joel Filliol. I'm a triathlon coach. I live in Glasgow, Scotland, though my work takes me all around the world. Previously, I worked for Canada. I was head coach prior to the Beijing Olympics. And then I went over to the UK, worked as head coach for British Triathlon prior to the London Games. My project now is my international squad. We've got several athletes already qualified for the Rio Games and several more contending for their countries. I'm a big podcast listener. For many years, I've been thinking about doing a project like this. And really, it's meant to be about high-performance coaching. I have many conversations like these anyway, and it seemed natural to record them and put them on the internet. I mean, I learn a lot from them and gain a lot reflecting on my own coaching practice, talking to other coaches and other athletes, not just for coaches, but for athletes or anyone interested in high-performance endurance sport. We always end up touching on cycling, rowing, swimming, athletics, whatever we can learn from other sports. In the off season, we typically can get a bit more of this sort of thing done, but I'm keen to use the build up to the Rio Games to speak to other athletes and coaches on the circuit in the lead up and the qualifying and work through the process here on the podcast. I listened to quite a few different podcasts, some inspiration for starting this. Steve Magnus has got a podcast called Magnus and Marcus on Coaching that's been quite good. They're up to more than 20 episodes now. We've got actually Hammer Media is got some quite good stuff. It's primarily from a hammer throwing website, but there's a lot of good stuff on coaching there. A few others that are related to sport, but not necessarily triathlon endurance sport. I listen to the Tim Ferriss podcast. Lots of interesting stuff on there. Finding Mastery is a new one I've discovered. Sports Coach Radio has got a number of episodes with other coaches, with strength and conditioning experts, scientists, all kinds. You Are Not So Smart has got some interesting stuff on there relating to coaching. And another one that's recently discovered, Pacey Performance Podcast. Again, not quite a lot of strength and conditioning coaches, performance managers from different sports. And there's a lot that can be learned there. In this first episode of Real Coaching, we've got Paulo Sousa. I've known Paulo for a long time. We have a lot of discussions about coaching. Today we talk about what is real coaching, our journeys into coaching and different paths we've taken, and finally analysis into the recent championships at Kona and ITU Chicago. So here's Paulo. Paulo Sousa.
Hi Joel, how's it going?
Here we are. Where are you this morning? Are you coaching, or you do real coaching?
Well, I do real coaching every day, but this morning it's pretty early here in Los Angeles, so I just grabbed some coffee and got ready. I don't have a lot of people a lot of athletes in town. Everybody's at the races basically, so I'm going to have 8 athletes racing this weekend. So yeah, the season's pretty much still going here.
Still going, but
yeah.
You get a bit of a rest. When athletes go off to the races.
It gets to be a little slower now, but I'm already working on next season and all that stuff. So this is the time of the year it gets a little quote unquote depressing, where you go no, this season's still not over and I'm already working on next season. So it's just the way the job is, I guess.
Sure. So I mean that's what this is meant to be about, isn't it? We've been talking about this idea for some years. Take some of our online discussions, chats, etc., and turn it into a discussion about real coaching. And I think there's maybe not a whole lot out there like this.
And I think there's a lot of useful stuff, at least useful ideas. I think people might be interested in hearing about. So yeah, when would we start talking about this?
I think it was around the time, maybe 2010. It was around the time that I got involved with coaching the Canadians, and you were still working for British Triathlon, right?
Yeah. That's around that time. So it's only taken us 5 years to come around to this. So,
yeah. I'll blame you. You're the organic type, just letting things develop. So I think 5 years is an appropriate amount of time.
Sure, involved in real coaching, and maybe less time for promotion. But I don't see this as a promotional thing as much as a way to talk about some ideas that are interesting, to further some of the chats we have, and you always come up with interesting ideas actually talking about it. So I think that brings us to what is real coaching. In the idea to call this podcast Real Coaching, there was a question from Ben Hobbs on TSR Radio in the interview I did with him, when one of his questions was what is real coaching, and I didn't really have a great answer, I think, at the time. So I think we can turn it into a whole series of discussions of what real coaching is, and maybe we can talk about how each of us got into real coaching. So what is real coaching for you, Paulo?
Yeah, for me, it's kind of like going back to the reasons why I coach, which is basically like the athletes and the sport, and keeping that relationship very simple and quote unquote pure in the sense that the focus is performance and how to get there, and real coaching for me goes a little bit against like the mainstream, where, as you know, triathlon coaching is very commercial, is very there's a whole industry of what I would call triathlon personal training, that and you see that industry pervading the coaching aspect of the activity. I always ask people, like, when you ask me what's real coaching is, here in the US or around the world is here in the US is like, it's the track coach at your high school. It's the football coach. It's the community coach at some, club. And in Europe or anywhere around the world is the system of basically like volunteer coaches that coach at clubs, that coach at basically like communities, and that doesn't have a lot to do with business, but has a lot to do with just like the coaching. It's passionate people that are involved in coaching because it's something that they're passionate about, and a lot of times that they're very good about it. So real coaching is more to do with that and less to do with, put up a website, have three levels of three packages, and the first package is $100 a month, and you just get a program and you get an email a day, and then you have the package which is $1,500 a month, and I'm your best friend, and I will coach you as well. So definitely, real coaching for me is that aspect of like the pure traditional sense of coaching, and less to do with the personal training business side of the triathlon industry.
Yeah, I mean, indeed, that the business side is taking over, isn't it? I mean, everyone and their brother is a triathlon coach now, and it's easy to sort of get into. But one of the answer that I wish that I had when I was talking to Ben, just thinking about it, is you've got to see these athletes, these people, and being on deck. And you alluded to this, sort of club coach, university coach. This can happen at different levels, but if you never see the athletes, you don't really develop those skills. You really are limited in what you can do. And I said, well, you can do reasonable coaching via distance, but that's not real coaching. There has to be some point where you've got to further that relationship. And when we I'm sure we will talk about the skills and what makes great coaching, but a key for that is observation and decision making. And really, how can you do that if you never see these people, and if you can't remember their names, or if you're they're just on some spreadsheet somewhere, or you're delivering a programs.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is at every level. I like just yesterday I started with a local age grouper, and just the fact of having him come to the pool and me being on deck and just seeing what was going on, just allowed me to have, an instant background on his abilities and his starting point and where to go next. That's impossible to have online. And with my elites, a bunch of times, like when they get in touch with me, the first thing I tell them is like, hey, when can you come and work with me here at the squad, And a lot of times it's more important for me, and I think it's the same for you. What's more important is to just make that happen as soon as possible, instead of just like, hey, here's a program for the next 3 months, and then we'll come around and to see you. Because a lot of times, and I think that's probably your experience too, is you assume some things, and you think that some things are true, and as soon as you're working with the athlete in person, you're just going to go like, wait, this is completely different. This is not what I was expecting. A lot of times the conclusion that I reach is, there's a lot of more fundamental work that we need to do with this athlete that wasn't done before, and that's what you see when you are with the athlete in person.
For sure, and I recall at one point you when you were starting up the squad, and maybe you still do this, that you wouldn't send a program for a new athlete that was just starting with you. You wanted them to come to camp first. Is that still the case?
Yeah, it's gonna depend on the person. A lot of the times, like with more experienced athletes, it's easier to just get started. But with less experience, definitely like starting on the right foot is gonna be very, very important. And I think one big change that I made with my squad was I used to start the season around November and then only have the first camp in January. And I felt that it was kind of like November, December turned into like a little bit of a waste of time, and it made a huge change for everyone involved when I started having the first camp of the season in December. Just gave everyone a really good starting point to the rest of the season.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, I think we talked about this online and via chats a few times. Is how much of the success of the season comes from that work you put in from say December to March, April, and yeah, getting a head start on that in person, I think is super important.
Yeah, absolutely. Preaching to the choir, you know this already, that particularly like with ITU racing, where athletes tend to race more than in long distance, you're pretty much like all the meaningful work is done by March, and then there's like during the season, even if you have times where you just like spend a month without racing or 6 weeks without racing, those are going to be maybe going to happen, 0 to 1 during a season, and there's no time to train during the season. So all the work that you do between December and March are going to make or break your season. While for long distance athletes, a little bit different. They have 2-3 big goals during the season, and a lot of races that they more or less train through, and there's big opportunities to get good blocks of training in season.
Sure, I mean, but the amount of racing that the World Series demands, or the World Cups, and certainly IT, I mean, it's very difficult to put in a block, and we both watched and commented on athletes just racing every weekend and performance degrading, and it's, you can see how important that is, and in fact, we've incorporated that into what we do, finding those blocks of time and being willing to say no, we're not going to go off and race, but we're going to invest back in the training process, at different points in the season. But it comes back to the investment in the winter, and then that comes back to the relationships and encouraging that start, whether it be November, December, and seeing these guys in person and getting to know them, and particularly for new relationships, bring it back to that point. I felt like all the number of new athletes that I've had that I didn't get to see early on, never, we didn't really get to establish the relationships. In many of those cases, the relationships failed, and we didn't get the performance we were after because we didn't invest in that bit of real coaching early on to really get to know each other and make those observations and establish communication, and what do you really see. And recall the coach Dan Paff, who had the comment about the best method of monitoring in terms of training load is a coach that pays attention, and we often talk about that, and that's essentially what real coaching is. So I think at this point in our discussion, we've been talking for about 15 minutes, and people might be wondering, who is Paulo Sousa? What is he doing? I think it would be worth kind of talking a little bit about your path into coaching, into real coaching, and for talk through how you got to this point, and then eventually what you're doing now.
Yeah, I've started out by a long time ago. Maybe that's how most people start coaching. Especially in Europe. I'm originally from Portugal. So I started coaching my friends who were triathletes as well, and I was an age group, pretty boring age group, triathlete and duathletes, and more. Then at my university there was a triathlon team. I started managing the team from then on. I started coaching everyone on the team. So kind of year by year, it kind of turned, grew from year to year of just doing a little bit more of coaching as a hobby. At the same time that I went through my academic career, where I got my undergrad, then I got a master's, then I got a PhD, and grad school in Portugal at the time was ended up something that's very on your own, where you just drive the world. So my PhD didn't have any classes, or it was basically just doing scientific research. So basically, there's a lot of time for other things. It's not very structured. So basically, they just tell you hey, come back in 5 years with a thesis, and so throughout all that time, kind of I started coaching more and more people, started coaching some elites, some Portuguese elites, and it just grew more and more to the point that when I was done with my PhD, I moved to the US, did a couple of postdocs, and when I got to the US, my coaching grew more and more. I started doing like training camps, starting coaching more and more elites, and then in 2010, I ended up, still as a hobby, started coaching Simon Wheatfield, then Kyle Jones as well, and the rest of the male Canadians at the time, and at the end at 2010 went through this experience where I went from being an awesome coach that's going to be a lock for 2012 to being this terrible coach that needs to get fired. And at the end of 2010, I was a little bit at a crossroads, and not knowing if I would continue my career in academia, if I wanted to coach full time, and then I decided to start the triathlon squad, and it was rough at start. You're just starting completely from zero at the time. Even at the time, while I was working with Simon, I pretty much like stopped coaching every age group athlete that I had. I didn't have many elites that I was working with outside the Canadian, so it was basically like starting from zero. And you probably recall this. I had like a call to action and recruiting people out of the internet, and just getting things started. And I think it started really, really well for something that started from zero, but it was always like going up. And throughout the years, like the quality of the athletes increased from year to year. We also got to polish some turds that did pretty well, and it's been a great experience of seeing the whole group grow from pretty much like just a guy emailing people and telling them like, hey, there's going to be a triathlon squad, and I'm going to be the coach, and a lot of people like, where's this guy? I don't even know this guy. To just get to the point where we're a very strong group with a very interesting dynamic, and this season we've been having really, really nice results, and I'm really happy about where we're at. But definitely like this has been in the making for the last 5 years. So the whole cliche of an overnight success taking 10 years, where we still got 5 years to go.
Indeed, I mean, you alluded to it a little bit, but you've basically got the three top males in the US. You had guys had a great performance at the Rio Test event, and if all follows as we might expect, that might make up the Olympic team. We will see, but certainly, it's grown in those 5 years, and in your history, you talk about how it sounds like you got into real coaching pretty early on at the club level, and just sort of progressed from there over many years, and I think that's probably key to some of your development. But have you thought kind of influences and how your strategy or your coaching evolved when you reflect back on that? What do you think the big influences have been on your coaching?
I think the big influences on my coaching as they're coming basically from like a point of building an attitude and a way of working, more than just saying like, well, I heard this from this coach, and and I started doing this. A lot of the times my influences are coming from picking up some aspects of a coach's attitude or an athlete's attitude, and just doing things that way. And I feel that just the whole thing about, it's less about like, oh, this coach said this and really influenced me. It's more this coach attitude or the way they work influenced me, and that influenced my coaching. We've had conversations, for example, about like a good example is Jose Mourinho, who is a guy that's just like, coaching football, soccer, has very little to do with triathlon coaching, but the way he operates, his attitude, and the way he, and also his success, obviously, that's the type of influence that a lot of times I pick up, and but I wouldn't say that, I think that this way of working comes a little bit from like when I started working, this was like the end of the 90s, and when you go back from where we're sitting right now, the end of the 90s, like triathlon was still a pretty like young sport. People were still trying to figure out a lot of things. So it wasn't like with running coaching, for example, where if you're 10 years ago or 20 years ago, you would think, okay, I have this influence. I have these guys that already did something, like the New Zealanders, Cerruti, or Daniels, or whatever. That's like, there's like schools of coaching. In the late 90s, when I started coaching, there were no schools of coaching in triathlon, and that's just a concept that's just starting to come up as our sport becomes more established. So my influences are less about people or training philosophies, but more about learning how, like, different coaches from different sports, including triathlon, have influenced the way I work, and less about how, this coach training philosophy influenced my work.
I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? As you say, it's a young sport. There isn't a great history of coaches working in particular ways. It's a relatively short history, and that may be evolving even as sport evolves. Of course, we all take inspiration or influences from different places. Either from Lydiard, et cetera, and maybe in triathlon, the early days of Sutto taking some of Lydiard's stuff and other influences probably has influenced a great part of the sport, and probably us to different degrees. But yeah, it's as I'm often saying, in review, I learned a lot from the athletes that I get a chance to work with, and I've been fortunate to work with many different interesting athletes, and the process process of working with them has been key. And we both worked with Simon at different times, and certainly when I arrived out in Victoria in British Columbia in 2001, and we had this guy that I had trained with when I was a junior, but didn't really know him or his process as well. But now he's won the Olympics, and here I am working at the training center. That was a huge learning curve. I remember showing up on deck, and it was part of the development group, and the job really was to be a development coach. And I had a ton of athletes to work with, but in these lanes also is the Olympic champion, and at that time Greg Bennett was there, and Laura Reback and others had been through there. And I think what a great opportunity to learn about coaching, to learn from these athletes as well as the other coaches there. But I think getting as well, like, there's not really a traditional or right path, and my journey into coaching, followed in part, like many. This happens a lot in our sport, but like many, it was a girlfriend, then wife at the time, becoming training partners into coaching, which doesn't typically work out very well. In my case, it lasted.
No, I would totally disagree there, Joel. I think that whenever somebody asks me like, what's the easiest way to access to become an elite coach, I always tell them that the easiest way is to develop or marry your spouse. So basically, I think that the first step to get into elite coaching is that, and as you know, a lot of coaches have started like you.
Oh yeah, and easiest, yes. Best, no. I mean, everyone in that way figures out that they're not the best coach for their partner. Everybody figures that out eventually. It's only a matter of time. Pick one relationship that you want to survive, because both won't, or the athlete simply will fail to achieve their potential because of protecting the relationship. And we see that a lot. And a lot of coaches, I knew I needed to outgrow that. And I would say in reflection that when Simon and I started work together in the end of 2004, remember he came over to my house. We had a chat. This was post Athens. He had finished 11th. His relationship with Lance Watson had reached a conclusion. They had been very successful, but he was ready to move on. And from that point forward, I would say my marriage relationship with my ex-wife probably suffered as a result of that, but in terms of outgrowing that, you don't want to be perceived as just sort of dating your way into coaching, or you've got to outgrow that, because that's as you say, an easy way in, and there aren't the built-in accountabilities, and we see that that still happens. It's a sport where it can become all-consuming, and the only people are doing triathlon or doing sport. But certainly, as a coach, I know. It's still the case, and it's surprising sometimes when you see that at very high levels. People that hold national roles, and you look at what they've done, and if their only real achievement is association with their spouse, I think it's something that we want to certainly I would want to outgrow, and I'm glad I did at that stage. But it is surprising when we still see that, and so when I'm moving out to Victoria, I kind of alluded to when I started working with Simon, we had. I think probably one of the best things that happened to me to actually learn about real coaching was getting fired from the National Training Center. I think it was the thank the guys that sent me on that path, because then I started my own squad, and that was really what Simon joined at that time, and prior to being eventually rehired as national coach for Canada, was operating my own squad down at Crystal Pool in Victoria, and funnily enough, both Cliff English and I ended up kind of in the same place, and he was out also doing some development work and growing through what's called the NCI coaching program, and he's gone on to be very successful as well, and we both came out of that of the National Center at that time, but that was the best thing that ever happened, because I had to learn how to actually coach and run things. And we had a swim coach at the Victoria National Center, and the swim coach ran the swim program. And I always felt it was limiting, to be able to take one portion of the program and if not outsource it, because you'd be on deck with the swim coach, with Neil at the time, but it's not your program necessarily. You're not delivering it, and I really felt that was limiting. So when I went on my own, and I had to do that, then it was really important. A great part of my development was actually here I go. I have to run my own program now. I can't rely on these other people, and And in fact, I think, it was instrumental in later developing what I think is a very effective swim program. But that wouldn't have happened if I had stayed in that structured system. And then, coming back to the national team, the Canadian national team, we really took our squad and it became the national squad, and we had a really great dynamic. I think I look back at those times and I think it was almost the ideal model, which was a very well supported squad. We did what we were needed to do, what we wanted to do. I'm sure from the outside it was perceived as being all about Simon and those athletes, and we probably had people would have think undue influence. However, we delivered performances and we delivered results, and that was a really great time. And then when that ended after Beijing, it culminated obviously with Simon's great performance in Beijing and coming up with a second medal with his silver performance that many people were inspired by, and indeed it was a culmination of that work. And then that's when I went on to Great Britain, and it was a interesting journey, and I think we could probably spend a whole discussion talking about different federations and what I learned over there. However, it being more of a management job, it wasn't. I discovered that it wasn't really what I was wanting to do. I really enjoyed doing it at that point in my career. Of course, knowing what I know now, I would have done things differently. And I probably would be able to handle it in a more effective way that would be more satisfying to me. But at the time, certainly it wasn't satisfying, and I didn't have the relationships. It wasn't real coaching in the way that I'm doing now. So I took that decision to leave that and move into the independent squad that we have now. That's we made of multiple nationalities, and we run the program how we think is best, and we're ultimately, I'm ultimately accountable in a much greater way, and I enjoy that. So it is different paths. I think that maybe the commonality is the amount of time we spent actually with athletes and from the early stages, on deck, if you like, and learning, learning really those powers of, observation of leadership, within the presence of athletes, growing with them. And, it's led us to similar places in a sense of, being entrepreneurial type environments or self-directed environments, if you like, to where we are now.
It's a little bit of a cliche, but just being your own person and having that entrepreneur spirit and way of doing things. You just get into. It's a cliche, but it's like a sink or swim situation, when you just get out and just say like, hey, I'm going to do this, and basically I'll have results, and I'll have this thing running, and and it's going to work, and I'm going to make a living out of it, or it's not going to work, and I'm just going to fall by the wayside. I think that it's kind of like one of those things that it puts a pressure on you, which I feel is a positive pressure of having to succeed, as opposed to when you have a job, and in the sport it's going to be a federation job. The drive is to keep the job, not to because we know that in the environment that we work and the way federations work, results don't really drive accountability. Basically, pushing pencils is what's going to drive accountability. And on the other side, when you're a private coach, things really need to work, or you're not going to have a job, and you're going to have to move on to do something different.
Yeah, it's interesting. I recall talking about that, sort of the difference between those who have the mentality of it's a job, and if you grow up much like athletes, I think if you grow up in that federation type employment or federation support as a coach, I certainly see a lot of these guys if they're not successful, they just sort of disappear and never to be heard from again. Whereas the successful coaches that I know and that I look up to, many of them have been in and out of federations, but they survive. They move on, they adapt, they evolve, and they don't just go away. And I think it's something to be said as well for athletes that become sort of entitled and maybe a bit spoiled, if you like, from the support they get. But I think there's equally the danger to kind of develop in that system, and that's why I think it was fortuitous, how my evolution has worked out. Getting fired from that job, as I say, the best thing that ever happened to me, and because I was able to survive and evolve and grow, and we've often talked about. We've been coaching. We've been talking for a long time. We've been coaching for a long time. We're talking. 15 years or more. And, we've seen the wave of federation people come and go, and, we're still here. And we're still going to be here when the current wave of people disappear. And, and I think it's a real challenge for federations of, to be driven actually by performance and to be actually accountable for performance, because I think often the only people that are accountable are the athletes, and and the accountability inside federation exists much more in terms of pencil pushing, paper pushing. Really, that means checklists of are we taking are we doing all the things that we should appear to be doing, whether that's getting results or not. Sometimes that seems to be enough, which of course is ridiculous. That's not what high performance is about. It's about delivering results, and but yet we see that, and we've survived through it, and we'll be as I say, keep coaching, keep going on, and I think that's what real coaching is about as well, right? If you're a coach, you keep coaching, and you can do that in different contexts. You can do that. Within a federation supported role, you can do it with stipends, the kind of thing that we both work with. Some athletes might get a stipend from a federation, and usually it's a relatively insignificant amount. However, it's still the principle of small investment from federations, or investment from the athletes directly, or I think what got you off the ground and in the squad was really investing in yourself and investing in the athletes, and because if you didn't do that, then you wouldn't be here, and the athletes would have no environment to train in.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean it's we could go on in a little bit into coach education and all of that, but maybe that's a topic for another time, of sort of the needs of how elite coaches develop, and how perhaps the shortcomings as I'm faced with renewing my USAT level 1 at this time, so I can continue to.
I also have to. We can, if we go down the path of coach education and all that stuff, maybe we'll spend a couple of hours talking about it. I'm also up for recertification with USAT, which as you know is you have to be a certified coach in order to have access to support, and so it's that time of the year where you just have to jump through a lot of hoops that are in no way connected to the activity that we have, so that basically jumps through hoops so that we can continue to receive the support, and it's always a little frustrating when you're have to sit through an useless webinar, or you can pay to do a an elite coaching mentorship, or you go, basically you don't get any credits from doing elite coaching every single day of your life, but you just have to jump through hoops in order to keep doing it. And it's always frustrating to go through that process.
Indeed. I mean, it comes back to sort of the business of coaching, and there's the business of coach education, and I contrast that with some organizations, some federations that are, in fact, paying for elite coaches to have great opportunities. When I was in Spain this summer, New Zealand brought up a coach to be with the national team that were there, and in fact, High Performance Sport New Zealand arranged for this coach to hang out with me and my squad when we were there, and I think it was a real interesting experience, exposure to some different things, and I think that kind of thing, and I know Jamie Turner did a scholarship like that as well, went around the world and was able to spend time with different coaches, and I think that's a real interesting investment. I mean, it's very different from what we're talking about here for sort of a hoop jumping research, but that's the kind of thing I think we could go into another time. Yeah, I think, and perhaps, it's been a good introduction to, I think, where we want to go with this podcast. We had made a note, do we want to do some analysis of some of the races? I think we've had the two finals, if you like. I don't know if that needs to be part of our discussions generally. I think we typically talk about this sort of stuff, but offline or online, if you like. Kona.
I mean, if I have thoughts on Kona, it sucked.
Yeah.
So as you know, I had one athlete in Kona that was Heather Wurtel, and she had a mechanical at the beginning of the bike, and it was one of those days where coaching sucks. So we sometimes make a joke because it happens a lot that we and more to you than me that you have like a large squad of athletes at one race or one weekend, and that it's not going to go well for everyone. And basically, you always have like one athlete that does well, a couple that have like this average race, and a few that have bad races. And I like to say, as a little bit of tongue in cheek, I like to say, coaching never a good day. and when it and sometimes I feel like, I wish I only had one athlete. I only wish I had one athlete, and if things go well, then great, and if things don't go well, then not. And obviously, after Heather's experience in Kona, I was like, no, this sucks royally. So definitely, I mean, Kona was interesting. Everybody keeps saying stuff like, it's always hot, it's always humid, but I actually went back and looked at historical weather data for the second Saturday in Kona, and it was actually like the hottest day in the last 20 years, and so temperatures were 89 to 90, and I think that played a big part in the run. You saw very slow times in the run. You had, like, on the women's side, like basically like the front pack, with exception of Daniela Riff, practically imploded during the race, and so the results were a little interesting. That from typically the racers that this on the women's side, the racers that usually don't ride strong but run very well, usually they have trouble like getting into the top 10, but this time they didn't have any trouble getting into the positions like 5th to 10th, which was interesting. And on the men's side, it was basically a little bit of a surprise that Sebastian Kienle didn't go off the front, and then the running times were pretty slow. So basically, like not a lot happened during the run, and the way the race developed was a little surprising, but I don't think on the men's side or the women's side the winner was a surprise, though. Both Jan Frodeno and Daniela Rief were the big favorites for the race, and they ended up getting the job done.
And indeed, I mean that's it's always impressive when the big favorites do it. I mean, we sort of take it for granted, but the reality of being a big favorite is, you have that expectation that really, unless you win, it's going to be a disappointment, and that's a weight on their shoulders. And I think it's something that athletes and coaches don't always appreciate until they're in that position. It's certainly those two delivered, and as you said, there was some interesting moments. I mean, many athletes imploding on the day, and whether they need to look at their race strategies, or whether some of them were overconfident, or certainly there's an element of these days of you show up in Kona whether you're healthy or not, and there's the whole sponsor circus, etc. And we saw some athletes who are probably not really ready to race, but they don't really say that prior, and imploded or DNF'd, and it was interesting. Top 10 on the women's side, some different names than might be expected, and certainly on the overall, there's the aspect of, if you race your own race, you might not win, but you might get get into the top 10, as you say, sort of, back yourself for the run. And, some people coming from way back. And I think that's always an interesting dynamic in Kona, is whether you sort of race the race or you kind of focus on yourself and race your own race. And we saw some of both, I think. Yeah,
I think that, to emphasize what you said about like the favorites winning and getting it done, which is something that's very hard to do. I think that on top of that, Kona right now is basically like Interbike for triathlon. So it turned into the trade show for the triathlon industry. And the requirements on the athletes on the week before the race is just absolutely nuts. Every sponsor wants a piece of them. They need to be signing autographs at the expo. They have a lot more exposure and on race week that they don't have throughout the year. They're doing the breakfast with Bob and TRS and this and that and the parties and the higher up you are in the pecking order, the more requests you're gonna have. So for someone like Jan Frodeno, for example, which is Ironman is huge in Germany, so the attention on him is huge, and he comes in and he's doing as interviews and this and that and stuff all over, and still having to compete on Saturday. It's a huge requirement on the athletes. So getting all of that is definitely like a big challenge, to be the favorite, having a lot of requests on race week and still be able to perform on Saturday. It's pretty impressive.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked as well, like, of course, this nothing like this happens around the Olympic Games, or even maybe only a little bit in the WTS final. If you're an American this year, you would have had some demands on you. But generally, there's nothing like this, and it's a huge demand on the athletes. Of course, they feel like they have to do it, and some degree, they do. They have to engage in some of this stuff. Otherwise, there's sponsorships, business, etc. It's just requirement. But it is a massive challenge, and moving on to Chicago, and we were both on the ground at the grand final. And, I mean, you just don't have the same kind of demands, but equally it's different, and the pressure and the intensity of ITU racing, and it's really something, being on the ground, you see a whole other level, don't you? And what were your impressions of Chicago? What did you walk away with from there?
Well, one thing that we can talk about is something that doesn't come out very often, which is ITU has this tradition, which I think is changing, of having running courses very short, and then they come out and say like, oh, this athlete ran a sub whatever, and the first impression that I got from the race is knowing that the run course was maybe 50, 60 meters short, and Mario Mola ran a 28:59, which means that on an accurate course you would probably run under 29:30, which is incredibly impressive. It's just a level of running which is pretty amazing. And so the biggest thing that I got from Chicago was just seeing that level of running of Mario and Javier, just at the front, just nailing the run, and that was pretty impressive. Also, I think it was a big deal that credit goes to you, coach, that Mario had an amazing swim, and he was right in front from the beginning, and that made a huge difference to his race. So it's always boring when you see stuff like an athlete dominating completely and just going off the front and stuff like that. So it was really interesting to see Mario and Javier just going for it at the front, and on the women's side, it's kind of like going back to the same comment that we're making about Kona. It's just for the outside, it seems that it's always so routine to see Gwen Jorgensen dominating racing, but what she's doing is incredibly hard. To have everyone expecting you to win and racing on your home soil, and we both know that even if from the outside things look easy to accomplish, athletes when they're in shape and they're really going really well, like they look like invincible to the outside, but that performance is hard, and bringing about performances is hard, and what she's been doing, it's so impressive.
Indeed. I mean, the amount of stuff, it's never smooth, is it? I mean, there's often injuries, there's illness that you don't know about, there's all of this stuff. It's so difficult, to keep things moving in the right direction, to keep on top of things, and to have the season that Gwen had. Very difficult to pull that off, and a lot of credit goes to her support team of Jamie and Pat, and it's super impressive to deliver on that. And particularly then we saw we're challenged somewhat by Non and Vicky. I mean, it's been great to see those two return. And I mean, the amount of time that Gwen put on them in the last lap, still, perhaps illustrates there might be a little bit more there. Maybe she wasn't running quite flat out, but still nice to see them challenge, and come back after difficult. Both of those athletes, the Non-Stanford and Vicky Holland, have had a number of injuries and missed a long period of time. And I think it's a useful for other athletes to see that these two have both had injury struggles, been out of competition for a period of time, and here they have come back and performing at the top level this year. And
one thing that's very positive as well is that both Non-Stanford and Vicky Holland they made a very hard standard to make the Olympics, and it's always refreshing or good to see. At least from my perspective, when you see athletes just like taking control of their destiny and and making automatic selection, because it's always hard. It's always very hard to see when Olympic selection is made, behind a closed door, a committee or a board that decides that this person or that person, for whatever reason, should go to the Olympics. And it's always great to see when athletes just make the automatic qualification and don't have to depend on factors that are in no way related to racing to go to the Olympic Games.
Indeed, I mean, to have to podium at both the Rio Test event and the Olympic final, I mean, really that's a policy that's designed that no one is expected to make it, but they don't want to,
yes,
they don't want anybody to get in by chance, and yet both of those athletes did it twice, which is really incredible to have two athletes do that, and for all the different reasons why it's difficult to do. I mean, it's an interesting one because is it a case of, you set the bar high and athletes strive to reach it? Because sometimes that example or that rationale is used for all sorts of things in high performance, and often it's plainly wrong. But in this case, I wonder if it was top 5, would there have been the drive to achieve what they did?
Yeah, it was very impressive.
Yeah, and coming back to the guys for a second, I think I saw some comparisons to probably one of the previous best runs would be the London Olympics, and Alistair Brownlee I think ran 29:06 or 7, and I think there's a couple key differences with a number of that I didn't see in some of the analysis, and some of that is the number of turns on the Chicago course was quite silly, really.
Yeah.
And of course we know these things slow the run down significantly, and whereas London was both quite cool temperatures and fewer sort of turns. I mean, it was a different kind of lap course, but there wasn't really any dead turns in this way. And certainly, in the running world, when we talk about running performances, we talk about the weather all the time, and it needs to be quite cool for good performances. And my takeaway, obviously, I was delighted with Mario and Rich, and the other sort of takeaway that I would say, sort of from an objective point of view, is just how Javi continues to respond to the challenges from different athletes, and how impressive that is. The number of racing, the amount of racing he's done, and the level he's been able to race at consistently is just super impressive. And he responded to the emergence of the Brownlees, and he had to get better. And though obviously he didn't win the final in Chicago, but really he's the undisputed. I think nobody could argue that he's deserving world champion, and to win to be 5-time world champion, and how he's responded is incredible. It's a sign of great athletes being able to evolve and adapt, and he's been able to do that, and so it was fantastic to witness that, and as I said, delighted to come out on top. However, for Mario, and equally for Rich to. Certainly from my point of view, to sort of do quite a lot of work pulling the second group back in, and then still have enough energy to have the run that he did. Was really pleased for. It was one of those races where it's not easy, but you really like to see the athletes put everything into it and fight for it and take their destiny into their own hands. Not just sort of say, look, I'm in the second group, but to drive that group to the front, and then. No doubt on some tired legs, but have a great run and fight to the end. And he was just came up short on the series podium to Vincent Louis, who had a great season as well. Really breakout season for Louis, you have to say, with the win in Hamburg. Was it Hamburg he won? It
was a long time ago. It's been a long season, Joel.
I mean, his worst result was 4th, I think, Louis. So in Edmonton, so it was very, very solid season, and very interesting coming from the historically the French have done well, particularly at the development levels. But I know they were obviously delighted to see. I think it was the first senior medal for on the men's side. Yeah, so that probably is a good place to finish. If people want to follow Paulo Sousa, how do they do that?
I think the best is to follow me on Twitter. I'm PS Triathlon on Twitter, and if you're going to follow me, I apologize in advance.
and myself, yeah, it's just my name at Joel Filliol. And we'll look forward to the next chat. I think there's a lot of potential here, a lot of interesting topics. So until next time.
Looking forward to the next chat.
All right, bye.
Bye, Joel.